Why not just talk?
Talk to whom?
Talk to the Israeli leaders.
That's kind of conversation between the sword and the neck, you mean?
This video will be entirely different from anything else I have posted on this channel. Despite that, I implore you to please watch this video in its entirety. Please listen to what I have to say. Even if you think you don't want to hear this today, even if you think this will negatively affect your mental state, if you think that you'd be better off just ignoring it, I'm here to tell you that this cannot be ignored. I am begging you to just listen. The descent into pessimism in the present moment cannot be disentangled from the lived reality of Gaza. What is occurring is not an ambiguous conflict, but a campaign of eradication that bears all the markers of genocide: mass civilian killings, deliberate destruction of infrastructure necessary for life, the weaponization of starvation, and the displacement of entire populations. These are not isolated atrocities, but sustained practices of annihilation. To describe them otherwise would not only be inaccurate, but complicit in the erasure of Palestinian suffering. Palestinians have been saying this for generations. Ghassan Kanafani, decades before the current massacres, described the Palestinian condition as one defined by a systematic attempt to erase not only a people, but also the possibility of their future. In the 1936-39 revolt in Palestine, he insisted the Palestinian cause is not a cause for Palestinians only, but a cause for every revolutionary, wherever he is, as a cause of the exploited and the oppressed in our era. Kanafani's words remind us that Gaza cannot be read as an isolated tragedy. It is part of a long arc of Zionist settler colonialism and the global structures that sustain it. What deepens the pessimism today is not just the scale of the killing, but its visibility. Gaza is the most documented genocide in history. Palestinians live-stream their bombardment. Journalists file dispatches minutes before they themselves are killed. Families upload their final words. And yet, nothing changes. If the promise of never again, born in the ashes of World War II and the Holocaust, was supposed to mean something, then Gaza exposes it as hollow. The international legal order, the human rights machinery, the endless talk of accountability. None of it is moving fast enough, or at all, to stop the bombs. Kanafani never trusted those structures. He was clear-eyed that liberation would not be granted by appeals to Western conscience. His assassination in 1972 by Mossad was itself proof of how threatening Palestinian testimony is to those invested in silencing it. Still, even he might have been startled by the paradox of the digital present. The whole world can see, in real time, the extermination of a people, and the seeing itself has no power. This is the soil from which pessimism grows. It is not the product of irrational despair, but of clear vision. The rubble, the hunger, the grief, all make belief in international justice feel absurd. The fear is that Gaza is not only witnessing genocide of its people, but also the slow genocide of hope itself. There is a particular exhaustion that comes from witnessing Gaza day after day and being powerless to alter its course. It is not simply sadness, it is a kind of moral fatigue, the sense that one is watching history's worst patterns repeat themselves while the world shrugs. This fatigue feeds pessimism, not because people are weak, but because the act of looking itself now demands more strength than many imagined they had. Palestinians know this weight more than anyone. The poet and professor Refaat al-Arir, killed in an Israeli airstrike in December 2023, left behind words that are unbearable in their prescience. In his poem, If I Must Die, he wrote, "If I must die, let it bring hope. Let it be a tale." These are not the words of a man resigned to despair, but of someone who understood exactly how heavy it is to keep believing in the possibility of a future. His students and readers around the world carry that burden now, replaying his lines against the images of his body pulled from the rubble. The psychological weight is intensified by the digital immediacy of Gaza's destruction. Unlike Rwanda or Bosnia in the 90s, there is no gap between atrocity and knowledge. Every bombing, every funeral, every child screaming in a hospital ward arrives on screens within minutes. The horror is unfiltered, and with each video and photograph, the viewer is forced into a confrontation, to watch and despair or to look away and become complicit. Neither choice feels survivable. Edward Said once wrote that exile creates a contrapuntal way of seeing, where the present is always haunted by the past and by what has been lost. Palestinians in Gaza are living a form of exile in place, unable to leave, yet perpetually uprooted, perpetually grieving. For outsiders who bear witness, the contrapuntal vision becomes something else, a double awareness of both the suffering itself and the crushing realization that the world order permits it. Pessimism, then, is not only emotional, but structural. It comes from recognizing that systems meant to protect life are functioning exactly as designed, to preserve power, not people. This produces what psychologists might call moral injury, but which Palestinians often describe in plainer, sharper terms: betrayal, the sense that every institution has failed them, and that even the loudest global outcry will not be enough. In this way, pessimism becomes less a mood than a rational worldview. When a people live through over 75 years of dispossession, siege, and massacre, expecting justice begins to feel naive. And yet the paradox remains. Palestinians continue to testify, to write, to film, to teach, even as they die. Al-Arir's final poem, Kanafani's novels, the voices of journalists like Wael al-Dadu, who continue reporting after losing their families. These are acts of defiance against the pull of despair. They remind us that pessimism may be rational, but it cannot be the only response. To collapse fully into it would mean abandoning those who insist, even in rubble, on telling their stories. If pessimism feels unavoidable, much of it stems from the media landscape. Even as Gaza becomes the most documented genocide in history, the dominant narratives in Western outlets continue to deny, deflect, or invert reality. People can watch entire families being pulled from rubble in real time and then open a newspaper or switch on the television to find the story framed as a question of both sides, of clashes, of complexity. The gap between what is seen and what is said is not just insulting, it is corrosive. It makes trust in public discourse impossible. The distortions are glaring. Headlines routinely erase the agent of violence, reporting that a building collapsed rather than Israel bombed a building filled with civilians. The killing of Palestinian children is softened into casualties, while the rare deaths of Israeli civilians are personalized with names, backstories, and grief. The result is not neutral journalism, but narrative warfare, designed to obscure who holds power and who is being annihilated. Ghassan Kanafani wrote about this long before the age of live streams, warning that the struggle over Palestine was as much a struggle over narrative as over land itself. He understood that Western media would always find ways to recast Palestinian resistance as terrorism and Palestinian death as unfortunate but inevitable. What he could not have predicted is how, in the digital age, Palestinians would bypass those gatekeepers and speak directly to the world, only to find their testimony met with silence, disbelief, or outright censorship. Social media platforms throttle Palestinian voices, deleting accounts or flagging basic documentation of war crimes as violations. Even the language of Palestinians, words like genocide, apartheid, ethnic cleansing, is treated as inflammatory rather than factual, despite being affirmed by scholars, human rights organizations, and international legal experts. This is what makes pessimism rational. It is not simply that mass death is occurring, but that the institutions tasked with telling the truth about it are complicit in the cover-up. The media does not just fail to report, it actively fabricates and obfuscates. It tells audiences that starvation in Gaza is the fault of Hamas hoarding aid, that hospitals are bombed because they are military sites, that the deaths of thousands of children are unverified. All of this while Palestinians themselves upload the evidence as they are being killed. The result is a kind of epistemic violence layered on top of physical violence. Palestinians are not only being slaughtered, but also denied the right to have that slaughter recognized for what it is. For witnesses outside Gaza, this double erasure breeds a sense of futility. If even undeniable truth, broadcast daily to millions, cannot break through, what can? The pessimism comes not from ignorance, but from realization that knowledge itself has no guaranteed political effect. Edward Said argued that Palestine was always narrated through others, rarely on its own terms. That remains true today. Western outlets amplify Israeli officials without hesitation, granting them immediate credibility, while Palestinian voices are doubted, fact-checked, or ignored. This asymmetry is not an accident, it is structural. It reinforces the idea that Palestinians must continually prove their humanity, even as that humanity is being erased before our eyes. In this context, pessimism is not a mood to be overcome, but an entirely reasonable assessment of the order of things. The media's function is not to reveal, but to conceal, not to illuminate, but to confuse. To hope that the truth alone will liberate Palestinians is to ignore the lesson of Gaza. The truth is visible, undeniable, searing, and still the bombs fall. To acknowledge pessimism as rational is not the same as accepting it as sufficient. If Palestinians themselves, who bear the daily weight of siege, starvation, and bombardment, still find ways to speak, to write, to record, then what right do we have to collapse into silence? The refusal of despair is not a denial of reality. It is a commitment to survival, to solidarity, and to the stubborn act of keeping the future open, even when it seems impossible. Ghassan Kanafani's work returns here with force. In his stories, characters rarely escape suffering. Children die, families are displaced, workers are humiliated. Yet the act of narrating their lives transforms that suffering into something else. Memory. History. A weapon against erasure. For Kanafani, to write was already to resist. His murder by Mossad was proof that even words were too dangerous to be allowed to live. His legacy reminds us that despair is precisely what colonial violence seeks, because despair ends stories. Resistance, then, begins with telling them. The same can be said of voices like Rafat al-Rir, who left behind not only poems but students who carry his lessons forward. In the face of death, he chose to frame his life as a gift to the future. If I must die, let it bring hope. Hope here is not optimism. It is not the false comfort that justice will certainly arrive. It is, instead, a choice to plant a seed even in scorched earth, to insist that meaning can outlive the body. Journalists like Wael al-Dahdouh embody this refusal as well. Having lost his wife, children, and grandchildren to Israeli bombs, he still reports daily, microphone in hand, voice breaking but unbroken. His very presence on screen undermines the narrative of Palestinian disposability. He is evidence that even when entire families are annihilated, the story will not be buried with them. This is why resisting pessimism matters. To surrender entirely to despair is to complete the work of the oppressor. It is to concede that nothing can be done, that solidarity is futile, that Palestinians are already gone. But they are not gone. They speak, they film, they bury their dead, and then testify to the world about it. To look away or to sink fully into hopelessness is to betray them at the very moment they ask for witness. Antonio Gramsci once described the need for pessimism of the intellect, optimism of the will. Intellectually, one may recognize the enormity of the genocide, the corruption of international law, the complicity of media, but the will must choose otherwise, to act, to write, to march, to amplify. Optimism of the will does not deny the horror, it insists on acting in spite of it. Hannah Arendt, writing after the Holocaust, made a similar claim, that action itself, even when futile, is what preserves human dignity. In Gaza today, this principle is not theoretical, it is lived. Every video uploaded from a shattered apartment, every poem written by candlelight, every parent teaching a child their history before they starve, these are acts of radical defiance. They model for the rest of us what it means to resist despair, even when despair feels like the most logical response. To resist pessimism, then, is not to deny the genocide. It is to deny its finality. It is to insist that Palestinians are not simply victims of history, but authors of it, that their survival and their voices outlast the bombs. For those outside Gaza, refusing pessimism means aligning with that insistence, making sure their words echo long after the rubble settles. I cannot pretend that writing this video is only an academic exercise. Each morning I wake to more images, more names of children, more rubble where homes once stood, and I feel the air leave my body. It is crushing. There are days when I do not know how to keep living in a world that allows this, to scroll through endless documentation of suffering while the perpetrators sit comfortably in press conferences and insist they are the victims. It makes life itself feel unbearable, grotesque. And yet, even as I make this video, I feel selfish. Who am I to despair, sitting at a distance when Palestinians inside Gaza continue to live, continue to speak, continue to refuse annihilation? My hopelessness feels like a betrayal compared to their persistence. I can close the app, step away from the news, sleep in a quiet room. They cannot. My pessimism, though understandable, risks becoming another form of privilege, the ability to give up, to withdraw while other people do not have that option. This same contradiction haunts me. I want to turn away, to protect myself from the grief, and at the same time, I know that turning away is exactly what sustains the silence around Gaza. To feel crushed is human. To stop listening would be unforgivable. So I write, even when it feels inadequate. I write because the alternative is silence, and silence is complicity. I remind myself that despair, though rational, cannot be the final word. If Palestinians in Gaza can carry on under siege, if they can record their own massacres so the world cannot deny them, then the least I can do is refuse to collapse into hopelessness. I know I must improve. I must resist the seduction of pessimism, not because optimism is easy, but because pessimism alone does nothing. The only dignity available is to align myself, however imperfectly, with those who still insist on life. That insistence is not comfortable, and it does not erase the cruelty of the world, but it gives me a path to walk, however unsteady, through the rubble of my own despair. The truth is clear. This is genocide. Documented daily, its evidence undeniable. The international order does nothing, the media lies openly, and even the act of witnessing begins to feel futile. Pessimism is not a flaw of perception here. It is a sober recognition of the world as it is. And yet, Palestinians continue to resist in ways large and small. They write poems, record testimonies, bury their dead, and speak their names. Figures like Ghassan Kanafani and Rafat al-Rir remind us that pessimism, while rational, cannot be the final position. To surrender to despair is to finish the work of those who seek to erase Palestine entirely. For me, this struggle is personal as well as political. I know how heavy it feels to live in a world where such cruelty unfolds in plain sight. I know the temptation to turn away, to collapse into hopelessness, but to do so would be selfish, a privilege of distance that Palestinians themselves do not have. Their refusal to give up is both an indictment and an invitation, an indictment of my own weakness and an invitation to choose differently. The task, then, is to hold the paradox, to acknowledge pessimism as rational while resisting its suffocating pull, to continue bearing witness, speaking, writing, acting, even when action feels useless. This refusal is not optimism in any easy sense. It is defiance. It is aligning ourselves with those who live on in Gaza, insisting that their lives, their voices, and their future matter, even when the world insists otherwise. If pessimism is the most rational response, then the refusal of pessimism is the most human one. O God, protect the people of Gaza and grant them strength and dignity. O God, grant their children peace in a world that has deprived them of mercy. O God, make the voices of the martyrs louder than the sounds of the bombs that silence them. O God, hasten justice and do not extinguish the light of hope in their hearts.
Sometimes, when we tell stories about our homeland, we love the story because it is about our homeland. And we love our homeland even more because of the story. What now? What should we do? What should be done? Let's go back home. And when we go back home, let's talk to our parents, to our grandparents. Let's approach them. Let's seek their stories. Let's beg them to tell us stories and to tell us more. And when they tell us stories, let's carry these stories and tell them to our little ones, to our kids, to our boys, to our girls. Because if we don't do that, if the story stops there, we're betraying ourselves. We're betraying the story. We're betraying our parents and grandparents. And we are betraying our homeland. Thank you very much.